Hello everyone and welcome back to Fandom Follies, the mini-series on my channel where I analyze FNaF characters, especially female ones, who were done dirty by the fandom, and in some cases the stories themselves. In the last episode I took a look at Vanessa and her treatment and representation in fandom content relative to her male counterparts. Today we're going to be taking it back to the Afton arc again and talking about the one who started it all, Charlotte, aka Charlie Emily. We were first technically introduced to Charlie in FNaF 2 as the child in the Save Him minigame, but she actually got a name when the Silver Eyes first came out. Frankly though, these are two entirely separate characters, and for the sake of this analysis, I won't be taking from novel Charlie at all, because she doesn't necessarily reflect the kind of person the real Charlie would be. When Pizzeria Simulator came out, she finally got her proper in-game introduction as the daughter of Henry Emily, and the way in which her father described her has for some reason been adopted as the canon interpretation of the character. Charlie is often seen as being, as pure as the driven snow. She's this perfect angel child who's entirely free of sin, and far be it from me to be that FNaF fan who wags their finger at the dead child for being angry that they're dead, an attitude I see an alarming amount, but there is a level of nuance here that's being ignored. Henry is not exactly the most impartial narrator if his behavior in the novel trilogy is any point of reference, and also it would be a little rude for him to be like, "You did mediocre kid" to his dead daughter, so this way in which he talks about Charlie is hardly the most neutral reading of her. Moreover, I think this interpretation takes a lot of the interesting complexities of Charlie's character away. So to get a better understanding of her, I think it'd be wiser to look back at what we objectively know. So let's take it back to the beginning, and through this video you'll hopefully grow to appreciate the surprising amount of depth to a character who has 3 total lines of dialogue. The first point in the timeline that we ever see Charlie is in Take Cake or Security Puppet. For the sake of this video, I'll be referencing Security Puppet more since it's more recent, meaning it probably more accurately reflects Scott's current vision for the story, and also it's just more detailed. In this minigame, we see Charlie trapped outside and the other kids seemingly choosing to ignore her. This is a critical moment for her character, and it informs all of her actions. Charlie died because she was stuck outside, friendless and alone, with nobody to help her. Even her own father failed to protect her. The puppet was the only thing to come to her side despite it all, and thus her soul is attached to it. Flash forward a couple years to the missing children incident. 5 kids are lured and murdered at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza by William Afton, the same killer responsible for Charlie's death, and Charlie brings them back with new animatronic bodies. On this note, something I think gets overlooked a lot in discussion of Charlie's character is the key story from Pizzeria Simulator. If you don't recall, the story is about a woman trapped in a room with 5 keys in a furnace, and each key corresponds to a door with a child behind it. She may choose one child to save, but the others would have to die. In an attempt to save all 5 kids, she melted the keys down into one, hoping that it would be able to open every door. Of course, it didn't work, and she left not with a key to 1 life, but with a key to 5 deaths. While these stories are all pretty vague and open to interpretation, I can't think of anything else this would be referencing. What this tells me is that Charlie had the chance to save one of the missing children, and I have an idea of who it might have been, but chose to forego it. She wanted to help everyone, but in so doing, she accidentally made the situation even worse. There's been a lot of discourse about whether it was William or Charlie who stuffed the missing children, and while it's probably more likely that William did the physical stuffing, I'm almost certain Charlie somehow facilitated their souls being tethered to the animatronics. After all, what else is this all about? And what would it mean that she lifted them into her arms? This is especially important to me because it does so much to deepen Charlie's character. In giving the MCI kid's life, she accidentally helped validate William's theory and unknowingly made herself culpable in facilitating the pain and suffering he inflicted. Of course, this isn't to malign her, she almost certainly didn't understand the implications of what she was doing, but at the same time, were her intentions entirely pure? Think back to what I said about the circumstances of her death, and how that was a defining character moment. Charlie was locked out, shunned by her peers, left alone. I think in giving the missing children life, Charlie kind of wanted companionship, other victims to accompany her in this cold and unforgiving void. I also think it's just as possible that she thought she was doing the same for them, and it probably could be both. She didn't want them to feel like she did, isolated and lonely. Again, she wanted to help everyone. That's the thing with Charlie, she's empathetic, almost to a fault. This also manifests as her establishing herself as something of a ringleader for the victims of Freddy's. Her UCN line establishes this pretty well.
The others are under my protection.
However, we also see that this trait makes her kind of condescending.
The others are like animals, but I am very aware.
While this could be in reference to the other UCN characters as well, and I don't doubt that's true in some capacity, it's admittedly kind of rude to say. This is especially egregious when we have an example of a character who seems to also have a heightened level of sentience, Cassidy, who we will get back to. Anyway, time for another hot take express. I think Charlie is the final speaker in FNaF 4. I know it's controversial, but when has William, I abandoned my daughter in a basement for upwards of 10 years, Afton, ever expressed a vested interest in putting his children back together? That also applies to, I let my son be bullied for a week until he died, and also I sent my son into what I knew was a death trap. And 2, you know who's known for actually putting people back together? Charlie. Also, I find it worth noting that the text color of the final speaker is ever so slightly different from Fred Plush's dialogue on nights 1 through 4. Like, I don't know, I feel like that just doesn't happen on accident. Another thing is the framing of the plushies here. It almost looks like Fred Plush is beckoning the bite victim to join them. You could even compare it to the graveyard scene in Pizzeria Simulator, where presumably Charlie is in the distance behind the missing children, watching over them from afar. Of course, the MCI has not yet happened at this point in the timeline, but I'd think this isn't supposed to be literal. This imagery is just supposed to show that Fred Plush is a protector or leader of these characters. So Charlie's gonna put BV back together, and I believe that entails what we see in the nightly minigames. As we learn in the fourth closet and Coming Home, the ghost children don't really see the world through the eyes of the thing they possess. In Coming Home, Susie doesn't even recognize that she's dead. She continues to live her life and coexist with her family as if she's still alive. I think this same principle can be applied to the FNaF 4 minigames. These aren't a literal depiction of the events as they happened, they're the memories of the bite victim being warped by his fractured soul. This is why we see all these weird anachronisms of things that happen later down the timeline leaking into the minigames, like this girl that looks like Baby who says the animatronics are possessed, the plushie that seems to allude to Springtrap, the balloon boy looking kid, and, of course, the tiny toy Chica who's missing her beak. But what does this all have to do with Charlie? Well, there's one more disparate detail that never sat right with me. It's been something that people have pointed out since the day FNaF 4 came out, but it's always been irreconcilable. Why does the bite victim look like the puppet? Like, seriously, it feels like a very deliberate design choice, and his official name is even the Crying Child, which is also the name of the ghost child in FNaF World, who we first saw as Charlie in Take Cake. Scott has said this game isn't full of random arbitrary details, so what gives? It's because this is a dream or a memory or samsara or whatever of Charlie's making. No doubt she sees herself a lot in the bite victim, the lonely, crying kid abandoned to die by their so-called friends. She's projecting herself onto him and basically keeping him trapped in the cycle of being forced to relive his last week over and over again. And I have to wonder, maybe because we've established this as an illusion of her creation, that's why the missing children see the world the way they do. Like, Elizabeth, for example, seems to see the world through Baby's eyes, especially based on the fourth closet. Maybe the children don't fully understand they're dead because of her interference. Again, this is not to vilify Charlie. I think that she had the best intentions. She wanted to spare the kids from knowing the horrific reality. But, of course, this indirectly led to them becoming mindless killer animatronics. As William says in the fourth closet, they have to give up a part of themselves. Again, think back to the Key story. She wanted to do what was best for everyone, but it blew up in her face and accidentally made things worse. It's ultimately really tragic. She's a little girl, a toddler if her age corresponds with the novel trilogy, and she's been dealt an impossibly shitty hand, placed in a position of power with no real understanding of what it is or how to use it. She's kinda like her father in that way. She tapped into an incredible power and tried to use it for good, but was blinded by irrationality. Although I would venture to say Charlie's intentions were more altruistic than Henry's, and also he was a grown-ass man and she was like 3, so he doesn't get an easy pass. Now though, I think it's time to discuss something I've been neglecting, which is FNaF World. So, if, as I've said, Charlie is the final speaker, it then follows that she would be the omniscient entity in FNaF World, represented as Glitchy Fredbear. So again, recall what I said about Charlie creating this kind of sanctuary for the ghost kids, where they don't have to grapple with the dark truth. I think FNaF World's the meta-narrative representation of that. It represents a version of reality that the kids see, where the animatronics are still friendly teddy bears and everything is garishly adorable. Another thing I want to talk about is our playable character in FNaF World. They seem to be someone who can see beyond the illusion and understand the world for what it truly is. And among the missing children, we've seen that one in particular seems to have increased awareness, like Charlie. So much so that once upon a time there was a movie about her. I'm of course referring to Cassidy. That's right, today is a double feature. I'd previously teased Cassidy being another episode of Fandom Follies, but unfortunately I'm afraid to admit that we just don't have enough concrete information about her to do a full-scale analysis, so she gets to be in this one. So as we learned in the survival logbook, Cassidy is the one who guides the bite victim to his happiest day. She asks him these questions to help him recall who he was. Was his favorite toy a plastic telephone? Does Fredbear still talk to him? Etc. The week before also implies a connection between these two. When Ralph witnesses the bite of 83 in a memory, he's killed by Golden Freddy immediately thereafter. So, with this in mind, knowing that FNaF World is directly connected to FNaF 3's Happiest Day minigames, and that our job is to help him find his way, I assert that Cassidy is the player character of FNaF World. With that in mind, if I'm correct, it gives the interactions with Red Plush a more callous tone. You don't understand that. You were made for one thing is a pretty cruel thing to say to someone you're ostensibly trying to help. Again, this idea of Charlie being kind of condescending. Though Cassidy is also aware, like her, she is treated as lesser than, used as a vessel for Charlie to help the bite victim find his way. So she sets the clocks and guides him to his memories. That's something lost on people a lot. Though Cassidy is still the vengeful spirit largely in Fanon, and that's probably going to be its own video eventually, from what we do know about her, she's for the most part a very empathetic and well-intentioned person. Even though Charlie's kind of an ass to her about it, she still does help the bite victim find his way, find his memories. In fact, while I like vengeful Cassidy, there's this weird subset of people who, like I said before, like to vilify her for being angry that she's dead. Insert that horrible consequences comic here. Despite this though, we see how this changes in FNAF 3. One interesting design detail in FNAF 3 I've always found interesting is this massive crying puppet in Mangle's quest. In this minigame, assuming it's of the same nature of FNAF World and is some kind of symbolic realm, we see the sadness deep in her heart. Again, in stage 1 we see a similar idea, of the one panel of the missing child. I've debated with myself over who the other kids are here, but ultimately I think it doesn't matter much. I think it just meant to symbolize Charlie's feeling of exclusion. I think that could also be why Old Man Consequences appears when you go too deep in FNAF World. It's a reflection of the loneliness that Charlie feels at the bottom of her heart. She's burdened by the nature of taking on the role of a protector, and these are the consequences she has to face. With that in mind, though, it gives Happiest Day a new bittersweet tinge. Despite her apparent loneliness, she's willing to let the others go for the sake of their own happiness. She stopped holding them down and realized that this is bigger than her. I can't imagine it was an easy decision, but it was the right one. And I think that's what a lot of people miss when they call Charlie a force for good. Like, people assume it's because of give gifts, but like, as I already mentioned, that seems to make things worse. Her ability to let go when she's clearly crippled by her loneliness and sadness is incredibly powerful. For that reason, I've actually changed my tune about her reappearance in Stitchline. While I still don't like that she came back at all, I think it's a nice book into her arc. She's finishing what she started, and she gets some closure before departing. This idea is really emphasized in her iconic UCN line.
I don't hate you, but you need to stay out of my way. I recognize you, but I'm not afraid of you. Not anymore.
Charlie has moved on from seeking revenge. She's left the demon to his demons, as it were. And ultimately, that's what makes Charlie a strong person, and that's what her story's about. It's not some fundamental quality of her soul that just makes her super enlightened and smart. It's her ability to make an unimaginably difficult and sad decision for the benefit of her friends. And I think that's truly the strength of her as a leader. And that's about it for Charlie. Sorry if this one was a bit, or a lot shorter actually, and also a lot more theory-y. I know some of these takes are probably going to be contested, so go for it in the comments if you have a different interpretation. Another thing is what I mentioned in the last video, that Charlie is unfortunately a lot less concrete of a character than Elizabeth or Vanessa, so to really do an analysis for her, you kind of have to get creative with your interpretation and play fast and loose with theories. This one didn't go too much into the fandom stuff, largely because, again, it's less concrete than with Vanessa or Elizabeth. I'm not as confident telling someone that they're interpreting Charlie's character wrong when it's left up to theories and interpretation a decent amount, as opposed to Elizabeth or Vanessa, who do have strong bases of fact to back up their readings. But, you know, I do think that a reading of Charlie as being good in a completely uncomplicated way is a bit flat and kind of misses one of the major themes of FNAF. Now, let's discuss the future of this series. As I mentioned, unfortunately the Cassidy episode is no longer a thing. If you thought some of my interpretations here were grasping at straws, then the Cassidy video would be a mile-long reach and then some. Despite her ostensible importance, we just don't definitively know much about her, especially since she lost her crown of vengeful spirit. However, this does not mean Fandom Follies is over forever. While I initially started the series with the intent of examining female characters' treatment in fandom, since that's a subject of particular interest for me, the FNAF fandom's bastardization of characters does not stop at women. Diversity win, gender-inclusive media illiteracy. So yes, indeed, I have a few more characters lined up for potential future entries into this series, but for now I have other stuff I want to focus on. For now, my next video should be about Doki Doki Literature Club. I've gotten back into thinking about DDLC lately, and it worms into my head once a year, and I think it's time I finally make a video about it. After that, I have something related to Pizzeria Simulator I want to make, and my oomph can probably already guess what that is, but it's still in very early development, so I'll hold my tongue for now. Other than that, though, that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching this far. Sorry this was kind of a weird one structurally, not my proudest work, but I needed to get it done someday and stop dragging my feet. Thank you so much for all the love on the Petscop video. It's a project I really put a lot of love into, and I'm glad it's doing relatively well. With all that said, I love you guys, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye.